Welcome to session 19 of the Simple course. In the first half of this session today, we'll introduce DBT's emotional regulation module. In the second half of this session, we will ask what makes life meaningful and then introduce Simple's way of striving towards a meaningful life, the goals diary card procedure. Our introductory video today describes Erickson's 8 stages of psychosocial or personality development. We'll be talking more about these stages in the second half of the session. To watch the video, please go to session 19 on the website. It's simple2021.com. Next are our usual reminders directed mostly at people doing the course in a group. Please take a few moments to read these on your own. To watch this week's mindfulness practice video entitled 5-Minute Gratitude Meditation, please go to the website now. For people doing the YouTube course as part of a group, you can now pause for questions, comments, or feedback. Today, we will start by reviewing the Skills Training Workbook, pages 148 to 182, which introduces basic emotional regulation skills. We'll take a break at the midway point. We'll have time for discussion. In the second part of the session, we'll cover the Simple Manuals Session 19, which looks at two topics. One, what makes life meaningful, and two, introducing tool number 5, the Goals Diary card. Please rate your homework now. To watch a video about the emotional regulation skills, please go to the website now. Today, we'll review basic emotional regulation skills on pages 148 to 182 of the workbook. It starts by asking two questions. Your emotions, what are they? How do emotions work? We'll go over the first 5 of the 9 emotional regulation skills presented in the workbook. 1. Recognizing your emotions. 2. Overcoming barriers to healthy emotions. 3. Reducing physical vulnerability. 4. Reducing cognitive vulnerability. 5. Increasing positive emotions. In the next skill session in 2 weeks, we'll cover the remainder. 6. Being mindful of your emotions without judgment. 7. Emotional exposure. 8. Doing the opposite of your emotions. 9. Problem solving. The chapter in the workbook starts by asking, your emotions, what are they? Emotions are signals that tell you what's happening and how to react to it. We can divide emotions into primary and secondary. Primary emotions are our initial reactions to what happens in our environment. Secondary emotions are our reactions to our primary emotions or our feelings about our feelings. We can have multiple secondary emotions. Primary emotions can set off a chain reaction of distressing secondary emotions. Emotion regulation skills help us learn to cope with our primary and secondary emotions in healthier ways. The workbook then goes on to ask, how do emotions work? Emotions are associated with electrical and chemical brain activity. Stimuli are perceived by our 5 senses, and that information is processed in the brain. Much of the emotional processing seems to take place in the limbic system. Emotions are associated with behavioral urges, for example, fight, flight, and freeze. Emotions are affected by memories of past experiences. Emotions are survival systems. The first emotional regulation skill is recognizing your emotions. When we experience emotions, they feel like a tidal wave, and we are often unable to do anything about them. If, however, we develop our wise mind and are able to recognize these emotions, we may be better positioned to influence them. To do this, we must slow down the emotional process and examine it. We can use chain analysis for this purpose. Chain analysis examines past events and emotions by asking certain questions. This allows us to develop a deeper understanding of our emotional reactions and how they impact our thoughts and behaviors. Emotional records is the workbook's version of chain analysis. One, to recognize your emotions, ask the following questions. When did the situation happen? What happened? Why do you think it happened? How did the situation make you feel emotionally and physically? What did you want to do as a result of how you felt? What did you do and say? How did your emotion and actions affect you later? Two, emotional records allow us to label our feelings. Saying our feelings out loud highlights our emotions and deflates the stressing feelings. Use the emotional record and answer the following questions. When and where did it happen? How did you feel? Did you say how you felt out loud? What did you do after you recognized how you felt? The second emotional regulation skill is overcoming the barriers to healthy emotions. Once you start to recognize your emotions, you can notice how they influence your behaviors and thoughts. Emotions can affect our thoughts and behaviors while also being influenced by our thoughts and behaviors. This cycle can be difficult as you get caught in self destructive behaviors and self criticism. However, the cycle can be helpful if you engage in healthy behaviors and self affirming thoughts. Cognitive behavioral therapy and rational mind remediation work to change thoughts and behaviors and consequently influence emotions. Emotions and behaviors. Emotions, thoughts, behaviors, and physical sensations are connected. Intense distressing emotions often lead to intense behavioral reactions, such as self destructive behaviors. People often get stuck in this self harm cycle because it is rewarding as it temporarily relieves the intense emotion. We are likely to repeat behaviors when they are rewarded. This is true for both self destructive and healthy behaviors. Common self destructive behaviors include self harm and manipulation. Self harm is utilized to reduce pain and feel better. Self harm may be effective in the short term as the endorphins it releases dull physical and emotional pain. This reward reinforces the behavior. However, there are risks and long term consequences of coping in this way. Self harm is a maladaptive form of coping. Manipulation is any attempt to sway someone's emotions to get them to act or feel a certain way. Manipulation can have short term emotional rewards, such as a sense of control or satisfaction, but it usually negatively impacts relationships over the long term. Worsening relationships can worsen our distress. Recognizing your self destructive behaviors worksheet. You can find this worksheet on page 171 of the workbook. Use it to observe your self destructive behaviors. This allows you to identify the behaviors you engage in and reflect on their emotional rewards. Observe your self destructive behaviors without judging. Discussing the unhealthy ways in which we cope can bring up distressing emotions. It's important to remember that accepting yourself without judgment, while simultaneously changing destructive behaviors, can help you live a healthier lifestyle. You can still acknowledge that you engage in destructive coping while recognizing you might now have been taught to cope in healthier ways. The third emotional regulation skill is reducing physical vulnerabilities. Keep your gas tank as full as possible by 1. Eating healthy food, 2. Avoiding over and under eating, 3. Avoiding drugs and alcohol, 4. Doing regular physical exercise, 5. Doing what you can to get regular good sleep, 6. Treating illness and physical pain, and 7. Reducing physical tension and stress. The fourth emotional regulation skill is reducing cognitive vulnerabilities. Remember, thoughts influence how we feel. Trigger thoughts elicit distressing emotions. Trigger thought examples include I'm an idiot, I'm a failure, something is wrong with me. Using emotional regulation skills, we can learn to cope with distressing thoughts. The workbook discusses two ways of reducing cognitive vulnerabilities: one with thought and emotion diffusion, and two with coping thoughts. Thought and emotional diffusion. Remember, we reviewed thought diffusion in mindfulness skills module. Using your imagination, you can picture thoughts and emotions floating away. Choose a visual that works for you. Remember to be mindful and non-judgmental. Reducing cognitive vulnerabilities with coping thoughts. Coping thoughts soothe your emotions and remind you of your strength and successes. We utilized coping thoughts and distress tolerance. Select a few coping thoughts that work for you. Use them regularly. Mistakes happen, nobody's perfect. This too shall pass. I'm strong and I can deal with this. Reducing cognitive vulnerability. Balance your thoughts and feelings. Sometimes we get stuck filtering thoughts. This means we are focusing only on a part of what's happening. This is often the result of experiencing distressing emotions. Balancing our thoughts and feelings requires us to look at the bigger picture by looking for evidence that goes against our distressing thoughts and feelings. This is very similar to a thought record and wise mind remediation. The fifth emotional regulation skill is increasing positive emotions. The goals of this chapter is not only to cope better with distressing emotions, but to increase our positive emotions. Often, we discount the positive and focus on the negative and distressing emotions. To start noticing our positive emotions, we can try to experience them more often by planning pleasurable experiences. Remember that we reviewed the big list of pleasurable activities. Utilize the pleasurable activity log found in the workbook to reflect on how these activities influence your emotions. Today, in the second part of the session, we're talking about what makes life meaningful and worth living, and also about the goals diary card procedure. Is there a connection between those two topics? The goals diary card and a meaningful life. In session 10 of the course, we began exploring personality and introduced Erik Erikson's 8-stage theory of personality development, which proposes that for healthy personality development to occur, we have to successfully negotiate these 8 psychosocial tasks. In session 15, we explored how dialectical behavioral therapy is a blend of cognitive behavioral therapy and Eastern spiritual tradition practices. We reviewed CBT's 3 main tools: thought records, behavior activation, and behavioral experiments. We then introduced rational mind remediation, remarking on how similar it is to thought records and how its objective is to help us see our wholes from rational mind. In our session on attachment, we saw how insecure attachment can hinder our ability to negotiate Erikson's psychosocial developmental tasks and our personality development. Today, we'll explore the idea that to lead a meaningful and fulfilling life, people need to have certain needs met. These needs were described by psychologist Abraham Maslow. Today, we will also see how if we struggle with Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, it becomes very difficult to meet those needs and to have a meaningful and fulfilling life. When we discussed cognitive behavioral therapy, we explored behavioral activation, which helps improve our mood and feelings through planned healthy activities. Later in the course, we will see how the treatment of trauma is divided into 3 stages: 1, stabilization; 2, trauma processing; and 3, resuming psychosocial growth. The goals diary card is in some ways similar to CBT's behavioral activation, but goes beyond it, in that the healthy activities it plans are those that we need to accomplish to negotiate Erikson's stages of psychosocial development and have our human needs, as described by Maslow, met. These activities enable us to meet the needs that make a meaningful and fulfilling life possible. The goals diary card procedure helps people resume their psychosocial growth, which may have been inhibited by their trauma and attachment issues. That makes it a 3rd stage trauma therapy tool. It is by resuming the psychosocial growth that people can then achieve a more meaningful and fulfilling life. Today, we're asking the $64,000 question: What makes life meaningful and fulfilling? A Pew Research Organization asked that very question to 19,000 adults living in 17 different advanced economy countries. In 14 of those 17 countries surveyed, more people mentioned family as a source of meaning in their lives than any other factor. Highlighting their relationship with parents, siblings, children, and grandchildren, people frequently mention quality time spent with their family, the pride they get from the accomplishments of their relatives, and even the desire to live a life that leaves an improved world for their offspring. People are also largely united in the relative emphasis placed on careers and occupations. Work is one of the top three sources of meaning for most people in most places surveyed. Many also highlight the importance of having one's basic financial needs met, or even having some level of luxury in order to lead a meaningful life. If we approach the question of what makes life meaningful and fulfilling from an integral theory perspective, we would likely get a very different answer from people at each of the different integral stages of growth. Most people at the archaic, tribal, and warrior stages of development were too busy surviving and meeting their basic needs to think much about what makes life meaningful. People at traditional level think of a worthwhile life not in terms of an individual's satisfaction and self-realization, but rather in terms of the individual's contribution to their community and the great chain of being. Traditional societies assign tasks and roles to different stages of people's lives. The Hindu four stages and stations of life are examples. Fulfilling those roles and one's place in the great chain of being is what makes life meaningful. Individualism came into being at the modern stage of development. To people at the modern stage, a meaningful life is no longer considered to be defined by the person's contributions to their community, but lies instead in their personal growth, happiness, and self realization. Modernity, with its materialist metaphysics, upended the traditional great chain of being by maintaining that God and angels did not exist. There is no soul or spirit, only matter. Today, people in developed countries live more comfortably than at any other time in history. Why do we struggle so much to find meaning in our lives? Pleasure and happiness. Establishing individuality by seeking status, wealth, power, and sexual gratification is associated with the first half of life. In the first half of life, we want to become successful individuals, well positioned in the social hierarchy. Synonyms for pleasure include amusement, gratification, enjoyment, thrill, buzz, diversion, ease, indulgence, kick, euphoria, and recreation. Obtaining status, wealth, power, sexual gratification, and being high on the social hierarchy is associated with increased levels of the excitatory neurotransmitters dopamine and testosterone, which in excessive amounts are neurotoxic. Dopamine habituates, so we need more and more of it to produce the same amount of pleasure. Dopamine is associated with addictions. Pleasure involves immediate gratification, is easily achieved short term, competitive, takes, can be bought, and is about the individual. It can be solitary and hacked with anything that is addictive. In the first half of life, our task is to become an individual. In the second half of life, our task is to focus less on our individuality and more on connection. Genuine connection, which is similar to love, can be with ourselves, others, our work, nature, and the mystery of the universe. The second half of life connecting brings what Maslow calls self actualization, happiness, and lasting joy. That depends much less on external factors such as status, wealth, power, and sexual gratification, and more on internal ones, such as the ability to love, feel gratitude, awe, a sense of mystery, and a desire to be of service. Synonyms for happiness include awe, wonder, bliss, contentment, joy, peace of mind, enchantment, hope, rejoicing, eudaimonia, optimism, meaning, and purpose. Happiness is associated with increased levels of serotonin, an inhibitory neurotransmitter, which slows us down so that we can smell the roses. Happiness, unlike pleasure, does not habituate, so that we don't need ever larger amounts of connection or love to feel happy. Dopamine inhibits serotonin. meaning that if we focus on seeking pleasure, we are less likely to achieve happiness. Happiness involves delayed gratification, is difficult to achieve, long term, gives, cannot be bought, and is the end goal of the world's great wisdom traditions. Happiness cannot be hacked. It is associated with Maslow's love and belonging, esteem, and self actualization needs, and with attachment, play, and the common good. Pleasure depends on external factors and circumstances. Happiness depends on internal factors, especially healthy psychosocial development. Modernity and the loss of meaning. Much of our sense of meaning in life comes from transcending ourselves and feeling connected in a loving manner to others, nature, purposeful work, and the great unknown. The modern worldview runs on a capitalist and consumeristic economy. There is profit to be made in the pursuit of pleasure, which can be bought. There is no profit to be made in the pursuit of meaning and happiness, which cannot be bought. Perhaps that is why our society promotes the pursuit of pleasure and ignores the pursuit of meaning and happiness, which can't be monetized. When a society focuses on pleasure, it tends to make people living in that society less happy. To summarize, secure attachment, healthy economies, and social institutions foster meaning and happiness. Insecure attachment, trauma, unhealthy economies, and social institutions reduce meaning and happiness and may focus on the pursuit of pleasure. You have mentioned Abraham Maslow a couple of times already. Can you tell us more about him and his work and how it's relevant to today's discussion? Maslow and the meaning of life. Let's start with a quotation from Pablo Picasso. The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. Maslow was a pupil of Freud. He became depressed while working with depressed patients. This made him decide to study people who were exceptionally well adjusted. Maslow is considered the father of positive psychology. He was associated with the SLM Institute in California. He recognized that if people were to grow to their full psychosocial potential, they had different needs that had to be met. He grouped those needs into the physiological, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self actualization. Needs lower on the hierarchy have to be reasonably met before those higher up can be achieved. Meeting all the needs leads to self actualization or the realization of the person's full potential. To self actualize and ascend Maslow's hierarchy, a person has to successfully negotiate Erikson's psychosocial developmental tasks or stages. Maslow and Erickson explore two aspects of the same thing: human growth or development. To self actualize, we have to, in the first half of life, find our gift or become an individual, and in the second half of life, give our individuality away by connecting. With self actualization comes a feeling that life is profoundly meaningful and worth living. Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Erikson's stages of psychosocial development are complementary. Erikson focuses on the psychosocial development tasks the person faces on the journey from infancy to older adulthood in order to develop in a healthy psychological way. Adverse life circumstances and social forces in interaction with a person's temperament can hamper psychosocial development. It's as if some of our developmental energy gets stuck at an earlier stage of development, leaving us with less energy to negotiate the subsequent stages of development. Maslow focuses on what humans need to be truly happy or to self realize. This is also a lifelong journey. To achieve Maslow's needs, we have to have reasonably healthy psychosocial development. Maslow's hierarchy is a ladder we want to climb up. Erikson's stages are the challenges we have to negotiate as we climb that ladder. The less energy we have as we go up the ladder, the less we'll be able to climb. Happiness doesn't depend on wealth, power, fame, or sexual gratification, but on healthy psychosocial development, which gives us the energy to successfully climb Maslow's ladder or hierarchy. If we don't have the conditions necessary for healthy psychosocial development, such as secure attachment and safety, it's harder to climb the ladder, have our humans' need fulfilled, and be truly happy. There are significant parallels between Maslow's hierarchy Erickson's stages of development, Hinduism's stages of life, and the stages of moral development. Healthy early personality development permits a later shift away from the self into wider circles of care, concern, and connection, which progress from the self to the family, to the community, the world, and the entire cosmos. Why do people in modern societies experience this loss of meaning? The loss of meaning in modern society. Let's start with a quotation by Friedrich Nietzsche. He who has a why to live for can endure almost any how. Emil Durkheim and Max Weber are regarded as the fathers of modern sociology. Durkheim was intrigued by how suicide rates, an indicator of mental illness, had increased dramatically in his native France and throughout Europe during the Industrial Revolution. He noted that this increase was more pronounced among Protestants than Catholics. In his book Suicide, Durkheim coined the term anomie, by which he meant uprooting or breakdown of moral values, standards, or guidance for individuals to explain this phenomenon. He proposed that with the Industrial Revolution, people moved from a traditional rural life embedded in the great chain of being to the life of a modern laborer in the city. As they did that, they lost connection to old traditions and ways of living, and connections to the land, extended family, neighbors, and religion. Catholics, however, were more able to stay connected to family and religion than were Protestants. This protected them from total anomie and suicide. Anomie has also affected other communities, such as Native North Americans, when they lost their traditional way of life. And in the present day, many working class people, such as those living in the American Rust Belt, Appalachia, and the Canadian oil patch. Weber's anomie and deaths of despair are very similar concepts. Meaning seems to come with love and connection. How do we get love and connection back into our lives? Sebastian Junger, in his book War, describes how a platoon of U.S. soldiers found meaning during their tour of duty. Junger, a journalist, was embedded with a platoon fighting in Afghanistan. He was surprised by how the soldiers, many of whom came from dysfunctional or socially disadvantaged backgrounds, thrived under difficult and hostile conditions. Years after these soldiers' deployment had ended and they were back in the US in civilian life, Younger decided to track them down and interview them again. This time, however, he found many of them were struggling. This finding was the inspiration for his 2016 book, Tribe, in which he argues that while in Afghanistan, the soldiers' connection to other soldiers and their sense of common purpose in life-endangering circumstances gave them a sense of meaning and was key to their thriving. Younger notes that the circumstances and conditions under which the soldiers in the platoon were living in Afghanistan resembled those of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, living on the edge of survival, depending on each other, making important contributions to the whole, and being attuned to their surroundings. This gave meaning and purpose to their lives. In 2018, the Swiss-British journalist Johann Hari wrote Lost Connections, uncovering the real causes of depression and the unexpected solutions. Harry's findings complement Younger's. In the book, Harry shares his struggle with chronic anxiety and depression. He initially pursued traditional psychiatric treatments with modest results. Disappointed, he set out to interview experts in mental health whose views challenged those of mainstream psychiatry. Harry proposed that the modern epidemic of depression and anxiety is, in part, attributable to our loss of connections. He argues that humans need to connect with, one, themselves by being aware of their physical states, feelings, thoughts, and desires, two, intimate others, three, the natural world, four, their tribe or wider social circle, five, meaningful work, and six, a meaningful cosmic story. The soldiers in Younger's platoon were protected from anxiety and depression because of their connection to each other and to a meaningful contribution they were making to the welfare of their tribe. Our hunter-gatherers' ancestors' lives may have been short and brutish, but they seem to have had the connection and meaning that Harry describes. Harry concluded that we evolved to live connected lives, yet today this connection is endemic. The symptoms of disconnection are boredom, apathy, anxiety, and depression. Disconnection is being ostracized from the tribe. Evolutionarily, that is a death sentence. A person's well being correlates with their quality of connection to themselves, others, nature, a meaningful occupation, and a meaningful story about the world, not to money, beauty, power, or popularity. In his recent book, Stolen Focus, Harry also warns us about cruel optimism, or the dangers of making individuals responsible for systemic problems. Both loneliness and our inability to focus and concentrate are blamed on individuals, but are really mostly systemic problems. Our issues like smoking, lung cancer, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, and our deteriorating attention problems, mental health, and political polarization, primarily individual or systemic problems. In his new book, Stolen Focus, Harry makes the point that societies portray these as issues about which we make individual choices, while in reality, enormously powerful industries are using sophisticated technologies to manipulate us in the service of corporate profit. For example, food, tobacco, and social media industries. Cruel optimism is when a simple solution is proposed to a complex problem. For example, go on a diet, stop smoking, or give up social media. This ignores the deliberately engineered, powerful addictive aspects of these problems. When people inevitably don't achieve results with these simplistic solutions, they are blamed for not trying hard enough. For example, 95% of people who go on a diet and lose weight regain it within 1 to 2 years. Failure is then blamed on the person, not on how the food industry manipulates people. Similarly, mental health is a complex problem, and although the approaches to it that the pharmaceutical and wellness industries promote can sometimes be helpful, they can also be forms of cruel optimism. Authentic optimism considers the complexity of problems such as these and the need for collective as well as personal approaches to solving them. Our lack of connection is a systemic, not just an individual problem. What is the role of mental health care in reintroducing meaning back into people's lives? Loss of meaning is an extremely significant social determinant of health. Holistic healthcare has become aware of this and attempts to address it through initiatives such as social prescribing. Social prescribing is based on the idea that other factors besides medications can significantly contribute to a person's health. What is social prescribing? What would it look like for the healthcare system to see a patient as a whole person instead of focusing on just their medical diagnosis? What if, along with medications, doctors and nurse practitioners were enabled to prescribe dance lessons, cooking classes, volunteer roles, caregiver supports, single parent groups, and connection to bereavement networks? Doctors should therefore prescribe activities that help connect people and restore meaning to their lives, such as dance lessons, cooking classes, volunteer roles, single parent groups, etc. Investment in these initiatives by governments would likely yield more benefits at less cost than the current conventional medical forms of treatment, such as medications. Psychology is becoming aware of the importance of connections to nature and developing strategies to foster these. Connecting to nature, mental health, and ecopsychology. The field of ecopsychology synthesizes ecology and psychology. A central premise of ecopsychology is that while our minds live in the modern world, the mind's underlying structures evolved in a natural environment that preceded the agricultural revolution and in which we subsisted by hunting and gathering. Humans, like all animals, depended on their environment for survival and had deep connections to it. Evolution is not simply a matter of individuals looking out for number one by not dominating nature. Nature is an interconnected web. Evolution is an ecological process. Our ancestors saw their environment as part of themselves and had a natural disposition to take care of it. For example, when the environment was under stress, there was a decrease in the rate of reproduction that lasted until the environment recovered. Humans evolved and adapted to become hunter gatherers in environments to which they had deep and rich connections. With the agricultural and industrial revolutions, humans lost many of those connections, and this negatively impacted their mental health, as at the same time, in many ways, it made life easier and safer. Our current ecological crisis also, whether we're aware of it or not, impacts our mental health. Ecopsychology seeks to expand and remedy the emotional connections between humans and nature, treating people psychologically by bringing them spiritually closer to nature. Numerous studies confirm that exposure to nature improves overall mental health. The capacity for attachment and the ability to connect to ourselves, others, nature, a meaningful occupation, and a meaningful cosmic story are parallel concepts. Secure attachment is being attuned, empathic, and responsive to others. It is love and connection. Spirituality is a feeling of yearning for and connection to something beyond ordinary reality that is mysterious, good, and that connects everything. It is also love and connection. Our attachment disorders and neglect of spirituality impair our ability to love, connect, and find meaning in life. Modernity, postmodernity, and materialist science, by asserting all that there is matter and denying soul and spirit, reduce our ability to connect and love. The materialist perspective becomes a glass ceiling because the intellect is the bodyguard of the heart, and if the intellect doesn't allow spirituality, the heart does not seek or nurture it. An integral theory perspective and approach to healthcare is an antidote to the loss of meaning and connection. The Goals Diary Card procedure is a systematic way of restoring meaning and connection to our lives. Today, we're introducing the fifth tool, the Goals Diary Card procedure. How does it help people find meaning in their lives? Prescribing connection and the Goals Diary Card. 1. The Goals Diary Card procedure starts from an understanding that many mental health issues are related to how changes in modern society have eroded the connections that are essential to human well being. 2. The Goals Diary Card procedure is a way of assessing how connected we are and restoring the connections we may have lost. 3. Without these connections, we cannot fully develop and realize our human potential. 4. The Goals Diary Card focuses on bringing about positive behavioral changes that will help bring us closer to realizing our Maslowian human potential by also working through the Ericksonian stages of psychosocial development. 5. The Goals Diary Card procedure is a rational/wise mind approach that promotes personality growth. Introducing the Goals Diary Card procedure. The Goals Diary Card procedure follows a 4-step algorithm. Let's first name the 4 steps and then go through each individually in some detail. Step 1. Track your activities for a week using a blank week calendar. This will give you a snapshot of your typical routine and allow you to access its balance. 2. Rate yourself 0 to 10 on each of Maslow's needs and wellness domains. Step 2. 3. Complete the wellness assessment tool. Choose 1 to 3 proximal activities for your goals. 4. Consider which of your Maslow's needs are met and which Erikson stages you have mastered. Step 3. 5. Schedule the activities you have chosen on a blank weekly schedule. 6. Use the Goals Diary Card template to track your progress with these activities. Step 4. 7. If you have accomplished a goal, choose another from the Wellness Assessment tool and use it as a target in your Goals Diary Card template. Repeat the same process, starting with Step 2. Let's start with Step 1. Step 1 is divided into 2 parts. Part 1, track your activities for a week using a blank week calendar. This will give you a snapshot of your typical routine and allow you to assess its balance. You can use this blank schedule to track your weekly activities. For 1 week, write down on the schedule a brief description of what you're doing, such as preparing a meal, watching TV, browsing the internet, doing homework, working, time for family, etc. Do it hour by hour. Once you've completed your tracking of activities for a week, consider the 8 dimensions of wellness, which are emotional, environmental, financial, intellectual, occupational, physical, social, and spiritual wellness. And based on your activities, rate yourself 0 to 10 on each of those dimensions. Use this rating template to do that. In step 2 of the algorithm, complete the wellness assessment tool, which probes in greater detail the dimensions of wellness following Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This will help you to decide which of your Maslow's hierarchy needs are met and which aren't. The wellness assessment tool looks at 6 dimensions: material well being, physical health, social health, emotional health, spiritual health, and intellectual health. Each of those dimensions asks you to consider 10 statements and choose the one that best applies to you. The tool provides a Likert scale ranging from 1, which is rarely if ever, to 4, always, for you to use. You are then asked to add your score for each of the dimensions. Those dimensions on which you score low are opportunities for improvement. You are asked to pick from one dimension 1 or 2 statements in which you score low and which are important to you, and brainstorm practical ways of raising that score slightly. You then focus on this goal until you have achieved it. A counselor or therapist might help motivate and keep you on track. The first set of 10 questions asks you to assess your material well being. The second, your physical health. The third, your emotional health. The fourth, your social health. The fifth, your intellectual health. And the sixth, your spiritual health. The last page on the wellness assessment tool asks you to total your scores on each of the dimensions and compare it to the ideal score. It asks you to reflect on what areas you need to work on and tells you what your score means. In step 3 of the algorithm, once you have chosen between 1 and 3 items from the wellness assessment tool to work on and come up with practical ways of working towards improving on those items, you can insert the activities into a time slot on a blank weekly schedule. You can also insert those activities on a goals diary card to track if you have done them. Step 4. It's important to stick with the same goals until they become part of your routine. Once they do, you could go back to the wellness assessment tool and work on another goal or target. To watch a video on why Maslow's hierarchy matters, please go to the website now. On the PowerPoint presentation that you will find on the website, there's a review and practice component that covers the tools, techniques, and strategies that we have previously covered in the simple course. Looking over those slides will help you consolidate the material. Let's look at the homework for this session. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and see you at the next session.